Good evening. My name is Cody French, and this is my flight scenario PowerPoint. So I did the second scenario in which the trip length was 188 nautical miles and the estimated time en route was an hour and 56 minutes. Pilot had 75 hours of flight training, PPL, but it's been a few months since I've had a prior cross-country trip. The plane being used is a 172 mic with the Garmin 430 GPS, and the plane that I had trained with when getting my private pilot license was the Cessna 172 Sierra, which had the Garmin G1000 unit in it. And in addition to the plane that I was renting, there was engine roughness during the mag check, and some spark plugs were replaced within the last 10 hours of flight time. The environment, the departing runway was shorter than what I'm used to flying out of. The day was very hot and hazy, about 90 degrees and 8 statute miles of visibility. And the winds were not favorable at 14 knots, crosswinds, gusting to 20 en route. Along with that, I had to stop for fuel mid-flight because apparently the plane wasn't fueled up all the way when it was checked out. And I needed to do that to remain within the 1 hour reserves. And there was no fuel at the airport I was departing from. External pressures late on departure, leaving, and the expectance of landing at the arrival airport prior to sunset. And there was also a cold front approaching the arrival airport about 2 hours after when I was scheduled to fly in. Okay, so for the trip was planned accordingly in my own eyes. Issues that I saw with that was obviously the runway being shorter, which if you're not familiar with a shorter runway, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, such as winds and stuff, and the amount of, or the weight and balance that goes into it, seeing how much runway you need to take off. So that's a big factor for me when doing the trip part and taking the runway into accountability for how short it is. Just creates an additional challenge for me as a pilot to add to my workload to figure out and to weigh the risks versus rewards. As the pilot, I got 75 total flight hours, as I said before, and 12 hours of that was cross-country. I've learned the basic flight planning principles and stuff like that when it comes to the cross-country with the 12 hours that I had through instruction. But it has been a few months since I've done a cross-country trip. And for the trip planned, that's quite a few miles and quite a distance to go without having cross-country recently done. So me personally, I would have planned for a cross-country that was probably within about 50 miles or so to a more local airport. That way you can kind of regain and get your recency with how everything works, how to plan correctly, and just get a feeling for it before doing a major long cross-country. So that's pretty much the major thing for me, as well as shorter distance to avoid inclement weather, easier having a diversion, and be able to plan for weather a little bit better. For the plane, as I said before, the plane is rented, and it was not what I was used to. I was instructed with a Garmin G1000 when getting my private pilot license, which is obviously a much more advanced system than the Garmin 430 GPS. And when checking out the airplane, renting it out, the instruction I got from the flight instructor about how it works, in my own opinion, isn't anywhere near enough to take that plane and have enough familiarity with that system to properly fly it. So I think that's a major concern because it creates a safety issue, and when you're relying on dead reckoning and pilotage, you also rely on that GPS to take you certain places or certain diverted airports when weather does appear and you need to divert properly. And if you don't know how to work the system, that can become a major issue during flight. Another big one was the roughness that I experienced during the mag check. and it was very concerning, obviously. And being I can't immediately check the maintenance logs, I don't know exactly. I didn't know that, excuse me, that the spark plugs were changed out in the last 10 flight hours. I wouldn't have known that, but I would have performed an extensive run up just to see if that would drop off at all. But I probably wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. Again, it's something that doesn't make anybody comfortable with running a plane that knowingly has something that doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, in my own opinion, take it back. Either get another aircraft or plan for a different day or just cancel it altogether. Also, the aircraft being rented is different than the aircraft that I used when doing my flight training. This aircraft that I'm renting has 40 degrees of flaps and has carb heat. And without being familiar with how those systems work, I don't think it's a great idea to use a plane that has those, especially on long cross-country flights. You need to have a few times of flying locally in that type of aircraft to get familiar with how the extra flaps, affect your landings and how the carb heat can be used when flying at different altitudes with high humidity and certain temperature windows. So being that I never had used those in this scenario, again, wouldn't feel comfortable taking that plane. The environment for this flight, the shorter runway, obviously, is a big factor. It's not a big factor, but it can be if you're not calculating the weight and balances correctly. But if you know how to do that correctly, and your winds are favorable or within your, your personal minimums, then I think it would be okay to take off. But seeing as that we're looking at 14 knot crosswinds, gusting to 20 knots, that alone right there for my personal minimums wouldn't be good for myself to to take flight, and especially at that type of distance. If it was a short, under 50 miles, maybe take a flight with that amount of crosswind component, but even then it's not very favorable, especially when you're trying to enjoy the flight or just to have a good time with it and be safe with the flying itself. So yeah, you would have to also take into consideration the maximum crosswind component of the aircraft itself to see if that's even doable with a 20 knot crosswind coming into play with your planned route. The lack of cross country and or the lack of cross country training for that amount of crosswind, I don't think it's favorable to do that at all. I think you need to be way less for personal minimums on long cross countries like that for your crosswinds. And going on to the external pressures, having the expectation to land before sunset is okay to have, in my own opinion. That's not a problem, but it does add an extra thing on your shoulders to take into consideration when trying to fly. But along with that, adding up with other different factors, it can put a lot of pressure on you and not make and allow you not to think clearly about what you're doing as far as the flight itself, and getting mixed emotional decision making there, and it can lead to dangerous situations, of course. With that cold front approaching, and it's only giving me about 2 hours from the scheduled flight time to landing, and that's when that cold front is supposed to arrive at my arrival airport. That's obviously cutting it way too close, and we already know that. With that, we're behind schedule, so we're late. We're late to take off, so we already know that window is already closed. How much it's closed all depends if we had a headwind component and how slow we're going, if any of the winds have changed. So I think that window is too small, and it really doesn't make for a safe flight knowing that you're fighting a huge system like that coming into the arrival airport. So for me, that right there is a no-go as far as flying goes. References are stated below. And